This has been a real passion of mine for a long time, having gone through the education system and the training system to become a scientist and a researcher in regenerative medicine and regenerative cell biology. So going through that, I understood that there was a dearth of information out there about what it meant to be involved in regenerative medicine, or what regenerative medicine actually meant, and making sure that the public understands what it is that we do as scientists, I think, is ultimately important. Over the course of the last 2 years of funding from Regenerative Medicine Minnesota, we've had really an opportunity to expand the outreach and the impact on middle school and high school students throughout the state. Every year we go and reach probably 2,000 to 3,000 high school students throughout the course of the summer, as well as provide on average about 8 undergraduate research internships with different regenerative medicine faculty and scientists, ranging from Mayo Clinic down in Rochester to the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis. So the grant funding by Regenerative Medicine Minnesota really allows us to provide an infrastructure necessary for the dissemination of information and really increasing the fundamental understanding of regenerative medicine throughout the entire state of Minnesota.
Using the grant from Regenerative Medicine Minnesota, we hope to find better approach for treating the heart attack.
So I've been working on regeneration using axolotls as a model system since I was a graduate student, and I've been fascinated that so many species can actually fully regenerate their spinal cord, they can regenerate limbs, which is really in stark contrast to humans, which have very limited capacity. And sometimes we forget that there's actually a large number of species through evolution which have this amazing ability to regenerate. And a nice example of it in Minnesota is that something we don't think about much is that deer and moose actually regenerate their antlers every year. So when we're looking at therapies for something like spinal cord injury, at the moment we have very limited therapies. So I think it's time that we actually look at this amazing array of species which have the ability to naturally regenerate and begin to understand the differences between these and mammals. Grant funding by Regenerative Medicine Minnesota is very important because it enables us to generate preliminary data to then apply for the very competitive federal funding. Currently, there are about 10,000 people in Minnesota who have devastating spinal cord injuries, and these can be impacted by the work we propose to do in this grant. In addition, thousands more suffer from neurodegenerative diseases, and this research can also be helpful to people like that. We just received our grant in March 2017, and we're just getting started on the work proposed in the grant, and we hope to soon begin to translate some of our findings from axolotls to mammals.
The hypothesis here is that if we occlude the trachea inside the uterus, the trachea of the fetus inside the uterus, we can promote lung growth, and those fetuses, they will have better lungs. Once we deliver them, they will have more chance of survival. This grant is very important because it supports the development of this program.
When I was training as a neurologist, I saw many patients with ALS. This is a disease that is ultimately fatal in everyone and really only has a lifespan of roughly 2 to 3 years after diagnosis. So once you're taking care of patients with this, you realize that there's this huge need, and I wanted to put forth my effort into this desperate problem. Grant funding from Regenerative Medicine Minnesota is critical to make these projects happen. It is often difficult to find funding for stem cell projects, especially clinical trials in stem cells. The fact that the state of Minnesota has invested in these trials is really important in bringing them forward. These trials just wouldn't happen if it weren't for their help. At any one time, there are thousands of patients with ALS who live in Minnesota. This treatment is geared for patients in Minnesota because we like to recruit patients that are local. While we are testing it specifically in ALS, we're hopeful that it will have more broad applicability in other neurodegenerative diseases, such as Alzheimer's or Parkinson's disease. Since receiving the RMM grant, we've been fortunate in that we've been able to complete the phase 1 study, which is a safety study for this therapy in ALS. There are many neurologists, many pathologists, many people in the cell therapy lab who are all contributing and working hard to make this sort of project happen. Using the grant from Regenerative Medicine Minnesota, we hope to really impact the disease of ALS, hopefully slowing the disease and ultimately coming up with a cure.
Normally, the cells within the heart don't divide, and this inability of heart cells to divide limits the regenerative ability of the heart. My research aims to understand which genes and which proteins limit this ability of heart cells to divide. So that when we know the genes and the proteins that regulate this process, we can then maybe boost the ability of the heart to regenerate itself.
What we're doing is combining this technology that we've built and we've developed and is unique to our lab with some of the advances in bioengineering here at University of Minnesota, which is one of the leaders in the bioengineering field, to combine novel 3D printing approach with cutting-edge stem cell technology to create solutions that will help heal patients.
Previously, I worked on a project that to look for cardiac development. At that time, by surprise, I find that gene not just making hearts, but also making skeletal muscle. And I think, wow, this is great, because right now I'm able to bring the two different areas together. The Regenerative Medicine Minnesota funding is important for me because it's allowed me to build up a model, a platform, such that I'm able to not just understand the disease, but also have a way to treat the disease.
Using the funding from the Regenerative Medicine of Minnesota, we hope to be able to impact one of the most precious assets of the state, which is our children, by targeting leukemia in this significant patient population. Results to date are promising in regards to being able to effectively deliver material to this cell population for eventual continuation of the grant and then translational application.
So the project is to validate a new technology that we have developed in the lab to reprogram GSPR-potent stem cells to potentially find a cure for diabetes. The grant is very important. It's a great way to start validating this new reprogramming platform. Regenerative Medicine Minnesota will help us hopefully to find a cure for diabetes.
The grant we received will create a tolerogenic environment so that beta cells can regenerate. Grant funding is critical. Without funding, we can't do research.
We all know that cells respond to the mechanical signals of their environments. We are only now just learning how they do that. And now we have to be able to measure that with precision on very small and sometimes fragile hydrogels. There is no instrument that can do it except for the one that we got here through this grant. And I have a comparable instrument built by Instron in my fabrication laboratory in Two Harbors. The most significant finding to share to date, of several, but the most significant one is that we can consistently generate a three-dimensional biomimetic cell culture environment for the culturing and differentiation of iPS cells, that's a type of stem cell. And this has allowed us to have an in vitro method of studying central nervous system pathologies, such as Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, and a rare genetic disease called adrenoleukodystrophy. Grant funding from Regenerative Medicine Minnesota is important because it is unique among the granting agencies. They are willing to take a risk, and it has allowed us to advance this unusual technology.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Regenerative Medicine Minnesota.
Thank you to the state of Minnesota.
I just want to say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to the state of Minnesota for fostering this collaborative environment and supporting this collaborative research which will help save lives.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Regenerative Medicine Minnesota.
They've allowed us to do something possible that was impossible before.